Bana ba Kenya namugeze ndi Mutembei. Mutembei lundi. Waya mumbe kama rumwelezera ko ule ko banenda kama tunda. Ko uhuru mu Kenya.
His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Kenya, Dr. William Samoei Arap Ruto, and all other excellencies, distinguished guests, Madam CS, Honorable Soipan Tuya, all protocols observed, good morning. My name is Samantha, and I'm here to read a statement on behalf of indigenous peoples of Africa. We, the African indigenous peoples from 20 countries, gathered in the pre-summit held in Nairobi in the past 2 days in preparation for this summit today, appreciate the Africa Climate Summit Secretariat and the government of Kenya, as led by our able President, Dr. William Samoei Ruto, for the continued recognition of indigenous peoples and traditional knowledge as a contribution to African climate change discourses. The role that African indigenous peoples play in protecting critical ecosystems across the continent makes them major actors in combating climate change. Furthermore, given that our livelihoods are based on direct use of natural resources, indigenous peoples are unfortunately the most hit hardest by climate crisis, notwithstanding the fact that we have the lowest carbon footprint, or rather the lowest emitters. As the African Climate Summit commences today, our main concerns and requests are as follows. 1, on clean and renewable energy and energy transition. As we are all aware, all renewable energy initiatives are all around indigenous peoples' territories. For us, there is no idle land. For us, the so-called idle land is our fathers' grazing land. This is our area of our cultural, where we undertake our cultural rights. And so to us, any investment around renewable energy must take into consideration free, prior, and informed consent. Moreover, renewable energy investment should ensure to ease mobility of indigenous peoples, because through mobility, by ensuring mobility, then it means you've helped us to be more resilient, and the vice versa is true. On adaptation and resilience to climate risk, we are not only victims, but we also come with solutions. Our traditional knowledge and ways of life enable us to build resilience and adaptation to the impacts of climate change. Furthermore, considering that there are an estimated 50 million indigenous peoples living in 5 regions of African countries, whose participation and contribution through indigenous peoples' knowledge and knowledge system provides tremendous solution to the climate change crisis. However, as much as we contribute this much to climate resilience and adaptation, our knowledge and traditional adaptation resilience are not mainstreamed in local and regional policy and legislation frameworks. Therefore, we request this summit to recognize the contribution of indigenous peoples' traditional knowledge, which make them more resilient to climate change. On climate finance for adaptation and resilience, despite the fact that we do play a critical role in protecting the ecosystem that our lives entirely depends on, A recent study has shown that indigenous peoples receive less than 1% of all climate financing globally. Indigenous peoples of Africa continue to be obstructed from direct access to finance due to lack of recognition of our unique identity. Lack of clear policy, legal framework, and complex requirements continue to limit our direct access to climate financing, yet, as I said earlier, we are the most hit by the crisis of climate change. We therefore request for establishment of an Indigenous Peoples Climate Resilience Fund to mitigate against the impacts of climate change. On effective participation, and as climate change discourse continues to gain traction, the indigenous peoples, despite being the most vulnerable group, has continued to face systemic exclusion from decision-making, and also have negatively impacted by the climate intervention, negatively impacted by the climate intervention and response measures, some of which are detrimental to the existence of indigenous people. During this summit and beyond, we request for effective and meaningful participation of African indigenous peoples, including creation of an African Union focal point at the AU headquarters to have an indigenous person focal point who will be handling our matters at the AU. In conclusion, we reiterate again that although indigenous peoples contribute the less to carbon emissions that lead to climate change challenges, we continue to suffer the most. We are therefore here with solutions and experiential lessons from Mama Africa. We look forward to have our concerns, priority, and contribution captured in the summit's outcome document, which is the Nairobi Declaration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. Your Excellencies,